Well, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome or welcome back, as the case might be. My name is Dalibor Petrovic. I'm the founder of the Summit Leadership Alliance and host to these TechTonic Conversations, a series of live webcasts that we've been putting on over the last, well, now 5 years to bring to our audiences conversations with interesting, exciting Canadian technology leaders and also founders and CEOs of Canadian technology companies, both startups and scale-ups. Today, as part of the series that we call Canada's Got Tech Talent, I am very excited and thrilled to welcome my colleague and my friend, Paul Vallée. Paul, who is the founder and CEO of a Canadian tech company called Tehama. Um, Paul and I go back about 6 years as we first met, Paul, if I'm not mistaken, at the either inaugural or the first session of the Canadian CIO Strategy Council at the time. And it was then that I first heard about you and what you are doing, what you're cooking. So I am thrilled to have this conversation and bring your story to our audiences. I typically do not spend time to introduce my clients because, of course, I would not do you a service. I would much prefer to start the conversation by actually asking you to tell us your story, how you navigated your life, how you navigated your career, to now be at the helm of Tehama. So, Paul, thank you first of all for your time.
Thank you, Dalibor, and it's such a pleasure to be here. Okay, well, I guess I was very early in my career interested in data.
Yeah.
And it is important to remember that in the mid 90s, which is the era we're talking about, data was nowhere near as cool or as interesting as today. And
Yeah.
so those of us who were very excited about that niche early on, have almost all of us have had really phenomenal careers, because data has every passing year become much, much more important it's become the lifeblood of the enterprise over that time frame. As far as that interest in data, I became interested in data and databases early on. That was coupled with a skill in troubleshooting production operations. And so I was early in my career, a database administrator and a systems administrator. And then I had the opportunity to move to Minneapolis, where I worked in a consulting company called Pragmatech, and I noticed at least one or if not two people from the Pragmatech era in our audience, which is kind of awesome, and that's why it comes to mind. There I learned enough about the American market that when I came back to Canada, I decided to found a company called Pythian. And Pythian was doing outsourced or remote database and systems administration. That was in 1997. And in the 1997 to 2019 timeframe, in various roles at the helm of Pythian, I managed to grow that company into a roughly 500-person business. And what was special about that 500-person business is that it employed people in 36 countries in over 140 towns and villages. And as you might imagine, when doing production operations with data, but employing a large complement of people working from home, that posed very interesting cybersecurity and compliance challenges.
Yeah.
And that made me very interested and have a front row seat for the launch of just about every meaningful cybersecurity compliance standard in the history of our economy, which includes, the original rollout of HIPAA in 2001, which was quickly followed by Australian privacy, Canadian privacy, European privacy morphing into GDPR. Also, the original rollout of the standard for the credit card industry, PCI, as well as the FERC-NERC SIP, which is our electricity frameworks cybersecurity standard, and the Food and Drug Administration's standards. All of those standards have basically emerged during my career and in my customer base. So I had to help them achieve compliance with each of those. And that interest in data governance, digital governance, compliance led to me, as you were mentioning, being a founding member of the CIO Strategy Council of Canada, which is now the Digital Governance Council of Canada, our national standard setting body on digital governance matters. And so that has been a lifelong interest in data and digital governance. Simultaneously, because Pythian employed hundreds of production engineers working from home on their own laptops, that poses ridiculous cybersecurity and compliance challenges. And that led to the birth of Tehama, which has now been operating as an independent business for the 5 years since Pythian and Tehama. We did the complicated conjoined twin surgery, which was good for both kids. Was good for both kids for sure. To separate those companies into two.
Yeah.
So as of
certainly,
today,
yeah, I was saying you are actually you were at the epicenter of that data evolution over the last 30 years. And as I understand it, Tehama is actually solving one of the hairiest problems that any enterprise of any size and in any industry is facing, like the data protection, right? So
yeah,
I'm very curious to hear the origin story of Tehama. Maybe you were just going there.
sure. Well, oh no, I'm happy to share it. In roughly in 2017,
Yeah.
Pythian decided to acquire a company based in San Francisco called Blackbird. And Blackbird at the time was itself a recently merged business between an open source database production operations company, which would have been a slight competitor to us, as well as a DevOps advisory company. And DevOps, of course, is the movement that is focused on the idea of creating infrastructure as code, automating the work of software engineers, and essentially turning into software some of the stuff that used to be physical infrastructure in our universe. That was incredibly important to Pythian customers at that time, but Pythian needed to really rapidly step up our game in that space. That led to us acquiring Blackbird, and Blackbird was incorporated at the corner of 8th Street and Tehama in San Francisco.
There we go.
And so, yeah, one of the earliest conversations and brainstorming sessions about the architecture and direction of our product was at that Blackbird office at 8th and Tehama. And so when we were trying to select a name for the business, this is a company that named itself. Several names came up in the conversation, and when we eventually voted, this is the one that we voted on. And so that's the origin story of the company. The reason the product needs to exist is because when you have several hundred people working from home on their own laptops, and you need to connect them to several hundred enterprises, all of which have their own separate governance and compliance regimes, but in the pre-pandemic era, none of them had very sophisticated cybersecurity posture to permit that.
Yeah.
What we did is we built the idea that we would connect to our customers through these data and governance enclaves, where the customer would be responsible to establish the governance of the cybersecurity posture, and then we would be able to fully manage the connectivity framework. And this really worked extremely well and led to us deciding to separate the companies into two in 2019.
So clearly, like you have discovered a very real challenge and developed a solution to solve it. First and foremost, like looks like for yourself. Like these are the best.
That's right.
These are the best ideas, right? Now you got me really curious. So I would love to learn more about it. Like, what is the concept? I know that, of course, you have prepared some material to share to help me and the audience understand what exactly you guys are doing and how you're approaching it. And by the way, for those listening in live, this actually is live. We are now at this wonderful Wednesday, March the 5th, 2025. So if you have any questions or comments from the audience, please use a Q&A function to engage. And Paul, love to learn more.
Okay, well, the concept of Tehama is to build these data enclaves. Data enclaves are a pretty general purpose technology that you can use for a lot of different use cases. So it's really helpful to anchor someone's understanding on a use case. And the use case of the hour is AI governance, and especially AI adoption governance. I'm going to pull up some slides to help your audience see exactly what it is that we're doing in that space and how we help in that space. So bear with me 1 second.
Yep. I'll show thumbs up when I see the deck, so you know it's live.
Great.
There we go. That's a thumb up.
Yeah. So before we talk about the technology, let's talk about the problem. And the problem that we have in enterprise right now, especially in larger scale security and compliance sensitive enterprise. And by that, I mean government, banking, the telecom sector, the electricity generation and distribution sectors. A lot of other, if you are working in the enterprise and security and compliance is a special concern, a lot of those enterprises are right now not permitting cloud-based AI adoption at all. And the reason is because it's not necessarily for a lack of trust of ChatGPT or OpenAI's security posture. It's because their compliance posture does not permit them to share their regulated or sensitive or secret data with third parties that they have not specifically validated. And a great example of that is HIPAA regime in the United States is one where before you can share any data with a third party, you need to take responsibility for their security posture and you need to commercially bind them to what's called a BAA or business associate agreement. And if they haven't done that with ChatGPT, they cannot share any data with ChatGPT, no matter how much you might want to trust them. The reality is in the banking sector and in the government sector, they don't want to trust them and they don't want their employees to share any data with those companies. And as a result, what's happening is employees are literally being forbidden from adopting cloud-based AI. And I mentioned ChatGPT twice, but in reality is a new cloud-based AI is launching every week. A couple of weeks ago, we had the tectonic maelstrom of coping with the DeepSeek announcement, which kind of proved that maybe intelligence is cheap after all, and the value is in our data as opposed to in the algorithm of intelligence, which is a fascinating shift in our industry's understanding of the problem. The industries that are forbidding data sharing or interactions with these cloud-based AIs tend to be dealing with two problems. The first one is they're wrangling with the idea of hosting captive internal AI. And the issue there is that captive internal AI might work for chatbots, but it is unlikely to replicate the billions upon billions of dollars worth of innovation that the global ecosystem is creating. And so there's a lot of capabilities that enterprises want to adopt that will not be in their private captive chatbot.
They simply cannot be. Like the investment is the limitation. Like
exactly.
Yeah.
It would the amount of capital would be needed to replicate the innovation of a global VC ecosystem is impossible to raise by any private entity. And the other dimension that they're dealing with, and that's the one that I really feel most strongly about, is circumvention. In cybersecurity, our worst nightmare is when our teams adopt a culture of routine and normalized circumvention of our policies.
Correct.
And this first slide is a great example of a recent survey. It was only in the, I would say less than 6 months ago, or about 6 months ago, this survey was conducted. And it was posted by CDW. And what they discovered is that as many as half of Canadian employees are using tools despite them not being permitted in their enterprise. And that is maps even to very senior leaders in the org. And when you've lost your leadership's compliance with your cybersecurity posture, you've lost a lot of moral high ground. So this is a burning and pressing problem. If you look at it, one side of the nickel, the pressing problem is no matter what we do, we're not going to have access to all of this innovation. And if you look at the other side of the nickel, the pressing problem is our employees don't seem to care that we are willing to sacrifice access to the other half of the nickel they're
Yeah.
still using the tools. So
Yeah.
what are enterprises doing becomes the path forward. A lot of enterprises are adopting a permissive, policy-driven strategy. And if you look at the policy that I pasted on the left here from a notable Canadian enterprise, what you're looking at is, essentially the enterprises imploring and training, but imploring their users, please don't leak any data. Okay, please protect your activity. Please make sure to keep a record of what you did so that we know what you got. And please recognize that there are copyright, licensing, and intellectual property dimensions to this problem space. Here's the
And
thing.
hope that they will follow.
This is picked up with hopes and dreams. This is not
Yeah.
governance. So I have
Yeah.
Moses there. Moses's 10 commandments are not governance. Okay. Governance is not pleading with people or training people to do the right thing. Governance, and the key word here is govern, which if we think of government, what government does to govern is they create more than just laws explaining to people what is and isn't permitted. They create policing and judiciary and prison and all of these other apparatuses of government are what government needs to do to create governance for their system of laws. If you map this to the enterprise, cybersecurity tooling is what permits you to actually enforce rules like the ones that are on the left. And unfortunately, it is a very challenging problem for the enterprise to adopt AI with confidence because of the lack of cybersecurity tooling. And that's really where the data enclave comes in. So what does a data enclave do? And it solves essentially a problem of intersection. Enterprises have a lot of data. That's a problem in and of itself because enterprises tend to not even know what data they have. That's what we call dark data. Okay, dark data is unlabeled. No one can really say where it comes from, what your licensing regime is. Think of the average attachment in your email inbox. Can somebody tell you what is the consent posture, the intellectual property posture for that data? Nobody can tell you.
No.
And the problem is, since you have access to that in your email, the enterprise is concerned because that makes it super easy for you to paste that in, upload it, use it with AI, which may or may not be permitted in your compliance regime. And so a lot of this problem with enterprises' data posture is not data that they've governed and know that they can or know that they can't use with AI. A lot of it is data where they have not governed it at all and they don't know what they can do with it. Enterprises also have a lot of talent, and not all of the talent is equally trusted. Okay, so there's internal employees. They tend to concentrate a lot of trust. And some of those employees might even be production engineers, where you concentrate even more trust because they have the administrative passwords. But a lot of them are arm's length, like freelancers or contractors. And some of them you've even tasked to attack your service, like red teamers or pen testers. You've tasked with attacking you. This is a massive challenge because not all of these people deserve the same access to your networks and to your data. And then simultaneously, a lot of different apps have different capabilities, some of which are regulated and some which are not. So if you think of a major bank like RBC, RBC does a lot of work that is not regulated, but of course the banking system is regulated. But that means that because of the nature of modern technology infrastructure, they issue one desktop to their employees. And at the time that they issue it, they don't know if this desktop is going to have access to the regulated systems or not. And as a result, they treat it with the highest possible standard of care necessary. And that just makes perfect sense. The challenge, though, is that now that desktop has access to all of that email and has access to all of those ports and networks, some of which are regulated and many of which are not, but some of which are. And as a result, these major banks feel like they cannot just adopt cloud AI and say, okay, let's just go do it. So here's the first key point here, and this is not meant to be a sales conversation, it's meant to be educational. The first key point is the data and governance enclave permits you to create a perfect intersection where only the people you want have access to only the data you want with only the tools you want, and simultaneously keeping the receipts for who permitted all of those things. So you can, first you can say, why does Dalibor have access to this enclave? And you can literally trace it all the way back through a genealogy of
Yeah,
trust,
yeah,
through a signing officer. By the
absolutely.
same token, why does this enclave have access to this data? Again, you can trace it back to who
Yes.
exactly greenlit the access to that data inside there. And then why does this app have this AI tool installed? Who permitted it is kept as a receipt in these enclaves. And that's really important because, Dalibor, I know that from our longstanding friendship that you were an employee at Deloitte. Deloitte is
Yeah.
a great example. It has tools like Cortex that are AI-enabled data analytics tools. A bank like RBC may be thinking, I would love to adopt that, but I can't install it on the laptop because it has access to too much data, and I have a regulatory exposure in adopting this AI tool with that data. But I might be able to adopt it on 90% of what I do, but I can't adopt it there. But because of the nature of the laptop, you don't have that perfect intersection. So the data enclave permits you to create that perfect intersection.
Yeah.
Now, key
This.
point in the AI governance space is no data at all. And that's where it gets really interesting.
So tell me more about that, the no data at all concept. Like what you've described so far, Paul, is
Mhm.
now that you laid it out, it is apparent and obvious that solution that you have created is the right, like this is the right idea. It's clear. The
Yeah, it's a
enclave
nice.
where you absolutely. But I'm curious, you have highlighted, even if that is no data at all. What do you mean by that?
A lot of enterprises, when I talk to them, and I talk to them about adopting cloud-based AI, like, for example, and I just want to be clear, we're not only talking about ChatGPT and DeepSeek style chatbots. The cloud-based AI that are coming out now are tools designed for software engineers,
Yeah.
some of which are unique to testing, some of which are unique to workflow automation, some of which are unique to container operations. All kinds of different tools are coming out that are vertically designed for specific workloads.
Yeah.
When I talk to the enterprise about adopting these tools, you will often hear, we have 5 years of data governance ahead of us before we can even think about doing that.
Mm.
5 years of
I
data
see it.
governance
Yeah.
is a real challenge because the reality is 5 years, they're not going to get to the bottom of their dark data problem in 5 years anyway, because they're
Yeah.
receiving new emails every day. And so, and the other challenge is when they do govern data using this 5 years of data governance, where do they put it so that they can actually use it with AI? They don't really have a clear answer to this. Now, the
This is
no data at
fascinating. Yeah.
all, yeah, the no data at all point is really obvious once you think about it. Think of everybody in your audience. When you
Yeah.
talk to ChatGPT, how often are you actually leaking secret, sensitive internal data or PII? And the reality is, as far as I'm concerned, it's almost never that I feel like
Mm.
pasting in PII into ChatGPT.
Yeah, of course.
Most of my benefit that I receive from ChatGPT comes from uh, totally routine interactions, research on a
Yeah.
technology problem, or research on a market, or research on
Yes.
how to proceed with a particular goal that involves engagement with government or legal matters. And those kinds of subjects really do not require you to share any internal data. And this particular dimension of cloud-based AI was studied, and it was studied again quite recently, about 6 months ago, with Boston Consulting Group. And
Mhm.
as an ex Deloitter, you know that these consulting businesses, their workload is very external facing, and I acknowledge that. I concede the point right out of the gate. But they tried to decide how much these consultants' productivity was improved if they had access to ChatGPT as opposed to not, and they found that productivity improved by 38%.
Yeah.
When they added internal data, it went up to 42.5%. Only 10% more. Okay.
Mhm.
Now, key takeaway, 90% of your gain. And what that means is that you can expect gains between 14 and 38%, even if you build a data enclave, permit AI from only within it, and integrate no data whatsoever
I see.
on
Yeah.
day one. And so
That
that's, I
makes,
think,
yeah.
Yeah, that's, I think, a really a mind-blowing idea, because what it means is that sectors as cybersecure as banking, telecom, and electricity generation and government could adopt AI in a data enclave where they can guarantee there's no data, because we keep the receipts of all the data that was permitted. And they can guarantee there's no data and then adopt AI from within that safe sandbox, permit their employees to interact with AI. They can paste out, but they can't paste in because that would be data infiltration. And the net upshot of that is that they get a lot of the benefits of adopting cloud-based AI with none of the cybersecurity or compliance concerns or exposures that you would normally expect.
So in other words, what you're doing, you are effectively enabling organizations to finally use AI tools with confidence.
Exactly. And without worrying about their data leaking, because it is extremely difficult to leak data when your only data that you can access is from the desktop in the enclave.
Yeah.
No. So that's what we do. We build these fully managed data enclaves in the cloud. In our platform, you can have one in an hour in any cloud region in the world hosted by Microsoft or Amazon. So you can really build them extremely quickly. But a data enclave does not need to be built by us. You can build them yourself by integrating a bunch of different technologies, including the virtual desktop, the security and compliance posture needed, the directory and authentication mechanisms needed, the workflow automation to collect all the signatures, the workflow automation to connect all the data assets, the workflow automation to govern the desktop's configuration and keep track of the signatures of who permitted. You could build it yourself. But the idea behind Tehama is that with our platform, you can build one in an hour and host them in multiple regions very quickly. And you don't need to put all those different tools together. Like you don't need to put ServiceNow plus Citrix plus Juniper Networks plus Active Directory together in a custom configuration and also, of course, you also don't need to operate it all because the foundation of the idea was DevOps. All of the systems integration and all of the systems operations to permit this, including the shift left compliance, is all already done and built as software.
What I just heard you say is that Tehama can actually spin up a data enclave for a client within an hour.
Yeah, it actually takes less than that. In about half a day, you could go from a policy that says we cannot adopt cloud AI to a policy that says we can and here's how, and have full confidence in your security and compliance posture to adopt it.
And not only is this solving a very real burning problem for organizations today, I think that the trajectory where we are, I think everybody is saying that the way the economy is evolving is that there will be more and more people in that gig economy, more and more contractors, more and more organizations tapping into the actual ecosystem around them, that without a solution like this is going to be increasingly risky and costly.
Yeah, because enterprises tend to have a cybersecurity posture that I like to think of as like a little bit like a walnut. It's got a crunchy outside and it's got a juicy, meaty interior. And if you can penetrate the outside, you more or less have unfettered access to all of the interior. And this is what zero trust networking was made to do for internal employees' trust allocations. But for outsiders and third parties, it does not work very well. And a zero trust architecture does not help you at all govern your access to external tools like AI that might not enjoy the normal trust that your desktop has.
So that's on the risk side. And on the cost side, what I know, for example, what enterprises do when they are engaging contractors on a side is they will actually buy and send you laptops, right?
Yeah, which is ridiculous.
Ridiculous. Like
it is
ridiculous.
It's extremely expensive and clunky as an approach to ship laptops. I know that, for example, here in Canada, every major bank does ship laptops to their consultants, even offshore and overseas.
Yeah. So it's just that behavior tells you it's a workaround. That behavior tells you it's an expensive workaround. You are zooming into the root cause and solving. And that is fantastic.
Yeah.
Wow.
So I have a couple more slides here, and I think your audience will be really interested in them because I dive into the EU AI Act and what I anticipate the regulatory regime will be in Canada. So so far I talked about governing adoption of public AI models. Of course, you can use the same technology to govern adoption of private AI models as well. There are other use cases here that I will cover, but in order to cover them well, it's helpful to cover a foundational understanding of how the product works and what the EU AI Act imposes on us as good governance for AI adoption. So status quo, you have users, they have access to too much data. You forbid their access to cloud-based tools, okay? What we can help them do, and this is the silver bullet, is you have users, they have access to too much data. We can create a new environment in the cloud that has no data in it, and you can prove that there's no data in it through our receipts-based architecture for all of the data that was provided to it, which could be a null set. And then from inside that enclave, you can provide access to ChatGPT and emerging models. Important point here. Now your data governance journey can begin. If your data governance function decides this data asset is permitted to use with AI, okay? And this is to decide that, you may need to do things like confirm data provenance, confirm data hygiene, confirm user consent for this use case. You may need to verify in a data hygiene dimension that your data has been screened and evaluated for bias, that you have a mechanism for people to file a complaint in the event they feel that AI was, et cetera, et cetera. But once you've done all that work and you've checked all the boxes, it's nice to have a place you can attach that data set and permit it to be used with AI. Again, the key point here is you can't attach it here because the user will inevitably leak your data. But you can attach it here because you've checked all the boxes. So your data governance now has a destination, kind of like when you're doing the dishes, you got the dirty side of the sink and you got the clean side of the sink. It's nice to have a clean side where you can put your clean dish and you can know that it will stay clean. What's happening in the EU is a really important direction for the entire industry with AI governance. And what's happening with the EU is for the first time ever, they are governing what tools you can use with what data. If you look at normal modern cybersecurity architecture, it is very much about what data is available. Zero trust is what data is available to this person. That's all good stuff. I love this stuff.
Yeah.
But it's rarely, if this person does have access to this data, it's rarely they can use this tool with it or they can't, right? So if they have access to the data, think of your email. There's very little technology to prevent you from pasting the content of that email into a different tool, even a tool you might have downloaded earlier today. Okay. Now, the EU AI Act imposes an elevated data governance posture before permitting AI to be used in certain industries and with certain data assets within those industries. Okay. So it's really cool, interesting, and new cybersecurity and compliance challenge.
Yeah.
Interestingly enough, while the US is definitely going their own way right now, and we don't know exactly what way they're going, a lot of the world must follow the EU's lead in order to maintain the integrity of their economies. And this is especially true now because the US is going their own way.
Yeah.
So two key points I want to make here. The six flags that I list there, these countries all enjoy what's called an adequacy regime with Europe, which means that their system of laws for privacy and GDPR compliance are adequate to the European mandate. In order to preserve those adequacy regimes, we must build a regulatory apparatus that is perceived as adequate from Europe for AI governance as well. So expect a lot of those countries, and this is not the complete list, but expect a lot of those countries to adopt EU compatible approaches to AI governance.
Yeah.
Now, while the US is going, second point, while the US is going its own way, and they are definitely calling it innovation first, the reality is there is no such thing as innovation without regard to safety. There is no such thing. If you think of what would an innovation first approach to the aviation industry be? Does that mean that we don't care if planes fall out of the sky?
No, of course.
What would an innovation first approach to elevators mean. Does that mean we don't care if elevators are falling from the 30th floor without? No.
Of
The
course.
reality is the reason that we build these systems is that innovation and security have to go hand in hand. So I'm expecting the US to do smart things in AI governance as well. We just don't know what it is. And we don't expect it to be compatible with Europe. Okay. We expect it to be different, but we still expect it
Yeah.
to exist. Now, what Europe points the way, though, is Europe is calling some AI so dangerous it will be forbidden. Some AI will be high risk and will be tightly regulated with very high bar for data governance. Some AI will be limited risk, and that's more or less the way that we're operating in Canada as the status quo. Okay.
Right now, yeah.
But interestingly enough, they are regulating transparency requirements even in those workloads. So you won't be able to pretend you're human if you're a bot, for example.
Mm-hmm.
And some AI is minimal risk, and we're already using that every day. Every time you type something into search at Google, they're using AI and it's replying to you, and you're using it, but that's minimal risk, and so it's not really regulated. The key focus area, though, is high risk because high risk categories represent almost a quarter of the European economy, including any product with a regulated safety component, definitely including airplanes and elevators. Okay, so just as a callback, every product with a regulated safety component is included in their high risk category. They're also including all kinds of biometrics, so a lot of healthcare, all critical infrastructure, a lot of educational and vocational training and selection for qualification for training, um, all essential services, public and private, and all law enforcement, access to the democracy, access to the justice system, and access to the border through the border control is all going to be deemed high risk. This is a large swath of the European economy.
But it's a large swath of world's economy. I mean,
Of course.
right?
But the key question on a lot of our minds is what's going to happen in my jurisdiction? What's going to happen in Canada?
Yeah.
And Europe right now, I think, has the most advanced explicit guidance for what good governance is in terms of AI adoption. And the rest of us are all just kind of navigating how to be compatible with Europe or watching what the US does, which could be something very random and different. But I'm sure we'll have learned from the European experience and be looking for geopolitical competitiveness versus the European experience. So what Europe has demanded for high-risk AI is they've demanded enterprises to adopt 9 different categories. So there's 9 black bubbles on the screen.
Mm-hmm.
One of those is a risk management system that anticipates reasonably foreseeable misuse. So they want you to have a plan in the event your human is misusing the system on purpose. A good example of reasonably foreseeable misuse is using an AI-based facial recognition system to spy on your love interest, right? That's a misuse of this capability. Europe anticipates that this misuse is dangerous and they do not want it to occur. So you need to have a system that limits the risk and manages the risk of reasonable foreseeable misuse. They also want human oversight so that if the AI says you should do a thing, a human actually decides to do it on the basis of the AI's reasons for saying that you should do a thing, and that this human can also, in the event of a fully automated mechanism, has both time and space to interrupt the system with a stop button. Europe also demands an appropriate level of system robustness and cybersecurity is implemented. What that means is that you can't just, in a high-risk world, you need to be able to provide stakeholders, internal and external, evidence that you have adopted the correct standard of care in cybersecurity and system resiliency in order to responsibly adopt it. You have data governance requirements. Those are among the ones that I described earlier in terms of examination for biases, examination for hygiene, consent, etc., for your data sources. And then you need to have a mechanism to gather evidence that you did all this stuff correctly.
Yeah.
That's where record keeping and technical documentation are necessary. All of these, by the way, are supported by our product. So we don't do every last thing all the way through, but as a privileged access management system, obviously our platform anticipates reasonably foreseeable misuse and creates consequences for that misuse and an evidence trail of what misuse might have occurred. We definitely keep a record of the human data interactions so that we have the ability to create an evidence trail of human oversight capabilities. Our system right out of the box, like 1 hour from now, that system has its ISO 27001. It has its SOC 2 Type 2. So it has a cybersecurity and compliance posture that is known and instantaneous. And then, of course, because we keep the receipts of all data that has been made available, we support a data governance function quite obviously. And all of this is a DevOps tool, which means that all of the record keeping and documentation are automatically collected. Europe also imposes that transparency requirement that I described, which says that the AI system can't pretend to not be an AI system. And then it imposes procedures and obligations in terms of its conformity and notification in the event of a high-risk adoption. But the key point here is, in a high-risk adoption, there's a lot of things you need to be able to show and to prove. And the cybersecurity ecosystem that will be built to support that is still being cobbled together. So it is really the Wild West out there in terms of rapid, compliant adoption of especially cloud-based AI in the enterprise. I mentioned a bit earlier about governing the use of high-risk AI, and I mentioned this use case of facial recognition and its possible abuse. One of the things that we do in that world is it's optional, but our data enclaves have the ability to create and capture a security camera video record of all of the desktops in our enclave. Now, that's inappropriate for remote work. Okay, so for remote work, you do not want to spy on your employees. And in fact, in most countries, it's not permitted to spy on your employees in their routine remote work because employees have an expectation of privacy in their day-to-day work. And I'm a privacy advocate, as you introduced me, and so obviously I know that. However, you don't have an expectation of privacy while using high-risk AI, and that's a key point. So while you're using this tool, you don't have an expectation of privacy. In fact, responsible adoption of this tool requires you to be supervised. Why? Supervision is the most efficient, reasonably foreseeable misuse risk management system. That's why we have video cameras on top of croupiers and casinos, and it's why we have video cameras on top of tellers and banks. It's because, not because we don't trust the employee, but because we can trust the employee because we're supervising the employee. Do you see the difference? It's not that we don't trust them. It's because this is how we trust them with this privilege, okay? The privilege of managing cash or the privilege of using this high-risk AI tool. And so we have that capability. It's literally a radio button in the app. You can just turn it on, and now you can really govern it and hold people accountable to their use of high-risk AI. Simultaneously, the video record lets you demonstrate that you have your human at the helm because you can recreate the human saw this data, they made this decision, and you have a record of them actually seeing it and making that decision. It also comes up for IP ownership. One of the interesting things in AI right now is how do I prove to the intellectual property regime that this is an invention that I own as opposed to an invention that was just created by AI. And so the guidance from the USPTO is that you have to be able to prove that one or more persons, like human beings, significantly contributed to the intellectual property. And so you can't actually lay claim to the intellectual property if the AI did it by itself, so to speak. This leads to a lot of friction because innovative enterprises, especially in product and materials engineering, are reluctant to let their employees brainstorm with AI out of fear that their patents won't be greenlit. By creating a video record of the employee guiding the interaction in conversation with the AI, prompting the AI, in refining the AI's prompt, and having a record of that, you're really creating a lock-tight defense against the idea that persons did not contribute to the development of the intellectual property.
And as you said, all of this is audited, tracked, and
exactly.
Yeah. Wow.
A call back to one of those early slides, being able to create a record of what interactions the people had with AI was one of the policies. You know the slide with Moses? One of the things was keep a record of your activity. Well, this would do it automatically. And so if that's an important thing, you would be able to do that automatically. Now, clearly, this is for high-risk workloads. This is not for routine workloads. But you can imagine if you're the Department of National Defense and you want to permit your top secret cleared employees to access ChatGPT, and you've already trained them, you've said to them, look, don't leak any secrets, but we can only trust you to do this if we can keep a record. Do you consent? And then you acquire their consent and they understand why it's important not to leak any data. Then it becomes exactly like the security camera in the casino counting room. Because what you've done is you've trusted them to do a thing because you can have an accountability function. And that is the heart of governance. Okay. Trust without governance is not real trust. And then, of course, similar things when we talk about cybersecurity posture, establishing a turnkey ISO 27001 is a great use case for a data enclave because you have it immediately. And so I'm not going to spend time on this slide. I think we've kind of beat this horse to death, but I do want to just explain. So I used AI governance as an explanation for why you might want to use a data enclave, but actually a lot of use cases have existed for a long time for data enclaves. You can use them to permit third parties to access data. You can use them to provision workstation and engineering environments in the sky. You can use them for privileged access management or secure hybrid work, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so anchoring on a use case is important to unlock people's imagination. But the reality is anytime you need to intersect people to data with apps, you can use a data enclave to do that. And it's just kind of a generically useful tool.
Paul, this is absolutely phenomenal. This is phenomenal. Like this is like I've generally understood the concept as we were interacting and chatting about this and preparing for this session, but this was truly a masterclass.
Thank you, Dalibor.
Thank you for that. Obviously, for those who are listening in either live or who will be watching this later on, if you would like to learn more, of course, Paul and the team will be available, and I'm sure that there is a slide here that shows your contact information. There it is.
Yeah, you got my email there, and I'm an open networker on LinkedIn. Feel free to link to me, everybody, if I can help. Obviously, I want to.
Yeah, this is fantastic.
One last cool announcement that I think is really exciting is just last month, Tehama signed our supply arrangement with the federal government in Canada. And that means that the public sector in Canada, for the majority, because almost every province and a public sector entity participates in this procurement vehicle, can now buy it unfettered. And so it's kind of exciting milestone for our business to be able to actually sell to the federal government and to the provincial governments in Canada.
That's congratulations. Congratulations. So look, we can perhaps now stop the sharing of the screen so they can see you.
Okay.
Actually, I was going to go there next. You are clearly a serial entrepreneur and a damn successful one. You mentioned your Pythian experience where you build a company that has 500 employees across, you mentioned 36 countries. Part of the reason why I'm hosting this series to invite and introduce Canadian tech entrepreneurs, founders, CEOs who are growing Canadian ideas and converting them into business is to also have a bit of a conversation and learn from you on like what is that experience like for you? How do you see the biggest challenges, for example, that a Canadian tech entrepreneur is facing? And what could we do better and different from governments and their policies and regulations to the way that our enterprises behave? Can you provide some commentary on that?
Well, I think it's helpful to start with, what does entrepreneurship really mean? Like, what are we trying to do? And fundamentally, what we're trying to do is we're trying to build product and we're trying to access customers. And in order to do both of those things, we need to spend some money. So there's really three different dimensions. There's your product, there's your customers, and there's your access to capital.
Yep.
If you want to add another dimension, we could talk about access to talent. And I think that's also probably important because all of these things, talent is the lifeblood. So there, I just mentioned four major key things. It's interesting when you look at Canada through this lens. Canada has phenomenal talent. Access to talent, while it has ebbed and flowed in Canada, I would say in general, access to talent is not our primary problem in Canada. The talent, in fact, Canada, when we do attract international investment, it is often in order to access our talent, which is why the people want to be part of it. I will say access to capital is a major problem in Canada. It is a major problem, especially for ambitious visions. We have access to smaller scale capital, but large scale capital, like for example, the kind of capital you would need to establish capabilities like, I don't know, if you wanted to put a rocket on the moon, that's not, before you have $1 of revenue, you've spent a lot of money. It's clear.
Yeah.
Accessing that kind of money for ambitious capabilities before $1 of revenue is very difficult in Canada. What we have working in Canada is a lot of what you might call software as a service, marketplace style capital, or fintech style capital, where you can build something small, have a little bit of revenue, build it a little bigger, have a little bit more revenue, and get that flywheel running. We do have that working reasonably well. But ambitious ideas really struggle to get capitalized in Canada. As far as access to customers, Canada suffers from a lot of US defaultism, which means that the perceived safest, smartest product to buy in Canadian enterprise and government tends to be an American product.
Yeah.
This plays to the advantages of the Microsofts and Amazons and Citrixes of the world, to the Junipers and Ciscos of the world, to the Zscalers of the world, if you wish, in my ecosystem. But you can name your ecosystem, and there is a lot of US defaultism. Now, one bright light is, as a result of recent developments, some of that is starting to give way. But the reality is the overwhelming majority of Canadian public and private sector technology spend is not spent in Canada. It's just spent from external parties. So that is a challenge in an access to customers perspective. And so I mentioned product as well. And so from a product development perspective, Canada is well established and is a great place to build a startup. And that's primarily due to tools like IRAP and Shred that help encourage higher risk product engineering investments by de-risking the capital deployment. So I'm not sure if your audience is particularly Canadian or some of it is international, but IRAP is a research and development funding program. Shred is a at-risk research and engineering tax credits program. And both of those couple to de-risk product development in Canada. So on that front, we're doing okay. So where we struggle the most is, I think it's perverse that my company has the majority of our revenue out of the United States, including public sector revenue. Our largest customer helps us support access to data for 29 US states, including healthcare PII.
Wow.
And we don't have a public sector customer that large in Canada yet, although I'm optimistic that we're going to unlock that this year. So
I was going to say, of all these 4 pillars of tech entrepreneurship that you mentioned, it sounds to me like 2 we have under good control. Talent, due to our, I think, world-class academia, right? But the issue that we have is access to more significant and perhaps riskier capital.
Yeah, capital for ambitious projects, difficult to source in Canada.
And then the behaviors of a buyer behavior.
Yeah, so let's talk about that one.
In certain cases, we are limited. Like like if you talk about office productivity tools, if you talk about hyperscalers, they all happen to be not Canadian. So how do we incentivize our industry to be more comfortable and be more intentional in actually getting?
Yeah, I believe there's an opportunity. Obviously, what we don't want to do is task our government or industry to make wrong decisions.
Of course.
Okay? So we want to make them make good decisions. But that does not prevent us from tasking them to get educated, because it is my belief that good product and good technologies are made in Canada. Okay. And so this is where I think we really fall down, is there is a reluctance to engage with the Canadian tech ecosystem. In the federal government has touched the stove and yanked its hand away, and we've seen it happen. We've seen it
Yep.
happen, and it
Yep.
is regrettable.
Yep.
It is regrettable that unfortunately um, uh, uh, some scandals have occurred, which has made for a real reluctance in procurement engagement in the federal public sector. And that reluctance comes from, well, nobody wants to get involved in that scandal. And that's a real challenge. Fundamentally, though, I believe that the government can and should mandate anyone who holds a budget in government to engage with the local ecosystem
Yes.
and spend time with them and learn from them.
Yes.
People buy from people that they like and trust.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. Absolutely.
And creating time and space for those relationships to be established is not a World Trade Organization issue.
Of course.
It is not a CUSMA issue, not that our co-signers are honoring it anyway. Creating time and space for people to get to know and trust people's capabilities and believe in them and respect them is actually something that cannot possibly cause a scandal. And that kind of engagement is literally the kind of cultural shift that I'm championing across the public sector and major Canadian enterprise. Because I would love to be able to spend more time with buyers in the sectors that I described. It's not just me, it's the entire ecosystem. And so receiving those mandates to say, hey, it is important for our business to engage with the local ecosystem. And I'm not telling you to buy stuff you don't believe in. I'm telling you to spend enough time with them to get to know them so you can figure out and make a good decision as to whether you believe in it or not. And I think that is the key right there, is just unlocking that optimistic curiosity and mandate to engage.
Well, all I can say to that is both hip hip and hallelujah. I think that actually you described the purpose of why I'm doing this channel. It's to actually connect people to help provide one more platform for our Canadian innovators, entrepreneurs, and founders to showcase their stories, to present themselves as people with ideas who are solving real problems by innovating and deploying our Canadian tech in our, first Canadian, then of course global market. What you described, I think, is the really rational, reasonable, but also very positive and optimistic approach to this. And all I can say is that I agree with you 100%. This was fantastic, Paul.
Thank you for this opportunity, Dalibor. It really meant a lot to me.
Thank you. This was wonderful. We are at time. For the audience, as you will know, we're going to soon process this video, post it on YouTube and on LinkedIn. Please like, comment, and share. If you're enjoying this program, please, of course, subscribe to the channel so you'll be notified when my next videos come up. With that, Paul, thank you again. This was a masterclass, and I wish you a wonderful Wednesday, onwards and upwards.
Thank you, Dalibor.
Bye-bye.